Hello, beautiful souls, and welcome back or welcome to my podcast, Rewire to Inspire. I am your host, Jessie Brown, and I am very giddy jumping on the microphone today. I am very excited to jump into episode 219 with you all. If you missed my last episode, number 218, I talked about 10 things that I wish that I knew when I was in high school. I do just want to preface that I know that hearing that title, you'd be like, well, maybe you're not in high school right now. Maybe that was years ago. There is still so many nuggets in that episode that I think would bring value to anybody listening. And so if you didn't listen to that episode because the word high school was there, I definitely encourage you to just give it a listen and see how it feels, if anything resonates, etc., etc. Couple things I want to just kind of chat about before we dive into today's episode is, one, my dog is outside the door playing with her frisbee. I have her bucket of toys outside the door here in this little area, and all morning she's just been grabbing toy after toy, and I've tried moving it, and she's just in a very playful mood and keeps coming back to the front of my door. So if you hear her, I do apologize. Secondly, the birds are chirping. Obviously, nothing I can do about that. I'm looking at getting some sound reflecting things on the wall here to kind of help with some of the echoing and keeping the sound here. But if you hear that, I just want to celebrate that because today is supposed to be up to 14 degrees. I'm so beyond excited. Today is also the eclipse is happening. There's just a lot of things happening today. And I'm just really excited. I'm wearing the funkiest sweater in the whole world. I thrifted this sweater like 2 weeks ago and I seen it across the store and I knew immediately that I needed to have it. Also, I am not, I'm very aware that these glasses are huge. If you're watching video, if you're listening to audio, you're gonna have no idea what I'm talking about. But if you're watching video, you can see that these glasses are absolutely humongous. However, I have had a headache for over a month almost every single day. So first of all, if you know of any causes of why I'm having so many headaches, please feel free to let me know any ideas that you might have. I've tried everything across the board and I'm just trying to get to the root cause of what it is. I feel like a large part of it is my vision and squinting my eyes when I'm not wearing my glasses. Even though I feel like I look largely, what's that character's name in Harry Potter? Professor, it's like Trelawney or something like that. I might be saying it wrong. Anyways, I feel like I look exactly like her, but nonetheless, you guys, I am really excited to be jumping on the microphone. I've been excited to record this episode for a couple of days. Like I said, it is going to be a little bit heavier, so I'm going to be talking about how to change your negative thinking patterns, but specifically post-trauma. So after you've undergone a traumatic experience, it's really common for our self-talk, our perception of life in general to just be shifted, and it can cause us to have a distorted view of our life and our reality and our thoughts. And it can just be really heavy and overwhelming and feel impossible for our life to take any other form of just beauty, I guess. And it can feel like daunting and overwhelming and like our life can never be the same again. And so I really wanted to talk about this subject because I feel like so many of us are tired of feeling miserable and stuck in our own thoughts and stuck in a negative loop cycle of the things that we tell ourselves. And maybe we're just tired of feeling like we're going in an infinity and we're not getting anywhere. And this episode rings true even if you can't really resonate to the statement after undergoing trauma. In some ways, even just going through the years of the pandemic, and I know sometimes people get kind of irritated when I talk about COVID and kind of lump that into a traumatic event, but really when you think about it, there was loss of control, there was unpredictability, loss of connection, and so there are 100% ways that affected us and affected our brains and our bodies and our self-talk and all those things. And so I just want to generally talk, and if this resonates, amazing. If it doesn't, I hope you can come back to another episode where it might resonate. But I know for myself, I got tired of feeling like I was in my own way, tired of my own thoughts. And so I want to take you guys back to a point in my life where this was very, very, very intense for me. So after my college basketball experience, so this would have been in 2017. So I was 6 months into college. I ended up quitting the basketball team that I was playing on. And I was in a very, very dark place. And at that time, and I've shared this story countless times on this podcast, but at that time, the thing that affected me the most was that I became a victim of my own thoughts. My thoughts heavily influenced how I showed up on a day-to-day basis. I did not believe that I was worthy. And again, this was all subconscious. I didn't know this, in my thinking brain on a day-to-day basis. But I did not feel like I was worthy of moving my body, of eating good things. My relationship that I was in, not that it was necessarily toxic, but it just wasn't the highest serving relationship for myself. And it definitely didn't help me grow or evolve to a healthy, better version of myself in any way, shape, or form. And when I look back and I process, and I've, done this work in therapy with my psychiatrist across the board, and the same thing that we come back to is how much my trauma influenced my level of self-worth and how that dictated how I talked to myself and then what I allowed into my life. And so the thing that we need to realize and just know is a fact is that when trauma happens, it powerfully affects our self-talk. If you think about it, even just if you feel safe to do so, think about something in your life that has affected you. Notice how that has impacted your relationship with yourself. I've worked with hundreds of clients in the realm of sexual assault healing, domestic violence healing. And the thing that surfaced the most was how their experiences then dictated how they viewed themselves. They didn't feel worthy of great things happening to them. They didn't feel worthy of loving themselves. And I don't mean all of them, but this was definitely a very, very common theme that I noticed all the time. Because when we feel like something has happened in our lives that is just unexplainable and is just horrendous, and our brain can't process it, our response is to self-victimize. It is to blame ourselves. Well, I shouldn't have been with that person. I shouldn't have been doing that thing. I shouldn't have gone on that trip. I shouldn't have, insert thing here. We blame because that's our way of coping through something. It's easier to blame ourselves to cope through getting through a hard time in our life, especially when you've undergone trauma, because it brainwashes you in a way to make you feel like shit. Well, if I hadn't played on that basketball team, those things wouldn't have happened. Well, if I hadn't gotten in a relationship with that person, this wouldn't have happened. The first thing that I want to say, and I know that I've said this to clients before, and sometimes it lands and sometimes it's like, F you. If you had known these things would have happened beforehand, you wouldn't have gotten involved. We need to give ourselves grace and permission to know that if we knew something traumatic was going to happen, we likely wouldn't have signed up for it. And I know that that can sometimes sound very disvalidating because it's like, yeah, well, no shit. But just hold that space for yourself for a second. I had to hold that for myself for a second because it was just I lived in a world of blame. Blaming myself for doing things, blaming myself on my decisions, blaming myself for saying yes, for going to things, for whatever. But when I finally realized, like, if I had known something bad was going to happen, hurtful was going to happen, I wouldn't have gone. I wouldn't have involved myself. And so I want you to just think in your life for a second, is there any capacity to hold space for yourself to validate that if you had known something hurtful, painful, whatever was going to happen, you wouldn't have involved yourself? And just give yourself permission to feel that. And again, if anything in this episode is overwhelming or triggering or too much to talk about or to listen to, I definitely encourage you to just be gentle with yourself, because I know that hearing these things sometimes, if we're not in a good headspace or if we're not prepared for it, whatever, it can really, really overwhelm our body. And I definitely do not want to get to that point. I want you to feel safe here and grounded and know that I'm here to hold that space with you. And I want to validate that you are not alone in your experiences, right? The point of this episode was to talk about negative thought patterns and how they can take over, and how our trauma, though, dictates so much of how we view ourselves. And I wrote down some different negative thought patterns that are common, but what I want to throw in here with all these is that they're almost always inaccurate. They're almost always inaccurate. It's a loophole. It's the same as when I talk on here all the time just about self-talk. It's like, what truth does it have other than the power that we are giving it? If we really think about it, does it actually have factual evidence? Or are we backing it up because we're choosing to repeat the cycle in our mind? And so the first example of a negative thought pattern is jumping to conclusions. I did this so much after experiences in my life, even just in relationships. I had something happen the other day that triggered me, and I had to go in my mind and be like, yes, I'm triggered right now. Yes, this is bothering me. But am I jumping to conclusions because of evidence that I have from the past? Yes. Okay. So you have reason to feel this way. But are you maybe jumping to conclusions right now in this moment because of experience that you had in the past? When we can talk our way through experiences like that, that is when we can start to heal and do the work. What happens is we become on autopilot. And this is where it takes work, right? This is where working with a therapist, doing the processing work, going through trauma healing and the phases of trauma healing is so beneficial for your life, because until you're able to challenge some of those thoughts, they will remain your belief. And the more that we allow them to remain our belief, they become a part of our identity. They become a part of our identity down to our DNA level. They become who we are. And so it takes work to undo that, to uncode that, to rewire that. And so jumping to conclusions is so freaking common after trauma, because what is our response? We want to protect ourselves. We want to avoid ever experiencing something like that again. So we jump to conclusions to anything that seems even slightly familiar. Jumping to conclusions is beneficial sometimes because it allows us to reverse engineer our thoughts and what's going to happen. But when there's no in between of contemplation, that's when it becomes toxic. If there's zero questioning your thoughts or why you're jumping to conclusions or even realizing that you are, that's when it can become detrimental. But that is the first way that we can, or the first name of a negative thought pattern that we do is we jump to conclusions. The second thing that we do is we exaggerate or minimize the meaning of an event. I would see this all the time, specifically, and what's interesting, specifically the minimizing. I think there's power in trying to minimize the pain that an event had on your life. Because when you're just like, oh, it's not that big a deal, it's fine, it didn't really affect me. I would have clients tell me some of the most horrendous stories, and just, I had one client tell me that his mom tried to bury him alive, would burn him on several occasions, experienced countless incidences of sexual assault, and told this story almost like, but it's fine. And again, that's a protective mechanism. It's not that inherently these things didn't affect him, but they affected him so much that he almost numbed out the emotion attached to it. There's no emotional pull with it, because when you experience things that are so horrendous like that, your thinking brain, your emotion brain, it's nowhere to be found. And this client specifically, we came to the conclusion that he had basically been just disconnected and dissociated for the first 20 some years of his life because it just wasn't safe to be in his body. So when he tells these stories, as much as it seems on the outside like, oh, well, this isn't a big deal, like this is fine, it's like, no, that's a protector part coming out and minimizing his experiences so that it doesn't have to seem as real. It doesn't have to feel as scary. And that's a technique and a tactic that so many of us do. We're like, oh, well, it's not a big deal. Like, you know, it's, and I know that this episode, again, is really triggering and I'm talking about deep stuff, but this is really common in domestic violence relationships where we're like, oh, it's not a big deal. Like, he was drinking and he didn't mean to. And, you know, well, it's probably my fault. And we convince ourselves and we tell ourselves that things aren't as bad as they are. And I know that I've definitely done this before, and there's just so much shame that comes with it, right? After or during a painful, traumatic event, it's really common to feel intense shame and guilt. And you want to suppress and push away and be in denial, because as soon as you shed truth to it and you admit it, it can make you feel helpless. It can make you feel powerless. And so that's another way that a negative thought pattern that we can have is we minimize or over-exaggerate our experiences. But I would go as far as to say that I most commonly see minimizing our experiences. The next one's catastrophizing. Catastrophizing is basically when, the biggest analogy that I have in my head is like you push a rock down a hill and it just goes and goes and builds up speed and builds up speed and builds up speed. You're just like giving it evidence, you're fueling it, you're catastrophizing, it's kind of the same as jumping to conclusions, but you're blowing things up, blowing them out of proportion. You know, like one example is when you're in high school and you're like, oh, if I fail this test, then I'm not going to get into university, I'm not going to get a job, and then I'm going to live on the streets and blah, blah, blah. And you catastrophize, right? You like over amplify the experiences or thoughts that you're having. And that's really, really, really common. Again, it's common because we're trying to jump to having control. A lot of catastrophizing is about having control. Because when we feel like we can get ahead of any of the repercussions of our actions, we feel like we then had control of that. We manipulated that in some way. And so catastrophizing is a huge thing that can happen after we've undergone trauma, because we're just like, well, if this happens and then that happens and this happens and that, it's like, it's a protector. All of these are protectors. All of overthinking and overgeneralizing is a protector because we don't want to experience something again. And again, even if consciously in our mind, we're not aware of this, our body is very good at storing trauma and storing these memories and acting out of impulse because it's learned how to. It knows what it doesn't want to experience anymore because it knows what feels good and what doesn't feel good. But sometimes our little noggin gets in the way and it tries to manipulate that and be like, no, I'm fine, I'm good, like it's whatever. And our body's like, no. I encourage you, if you've never read the book, The Body Keeps the Score by Bessel van der Kolk. It is my favorite book, and it talks all about this and how trauma is stored in the body and how the body remembers traumatic experiences that we've gone through. So a couple of the last ones that I wrote down are disregarding, oversimplifying, overgeneralizing from a single incident, mind reading. This is one that I've gotten really, really good at, where I feel like I can read people's minds and I think everybody's judging me and saying that I look ugly and my hair is a mess. And even in this episode, it's like I'm staring at myself and I'm like, oh girl, you probably should have got a little bit more ready to record this episode. And I mind read and I'm like, oh my God, what are people gonna think and whatever. And I've just started to challenge that, to be like, meh, like whatever. People can think what they want, but trauma does that, right? It makes us think the worst case. It's almost like, what's the best way to explain this? Really, you just feel like everybody's staring at you and everybody's judging you, and you become very hyper aware of your surroundings in some cases, and it just causes you to really panic and feel overwhelmed. And again, I want to say all these because we can experience these things and think that they're not normal. And it wasn't until I started learning about trauma and really studying it and working in it and experiencing it myself that I learned that all these are very, very normal ways that trauma can affect our thoughts. But the point of this episode was for me to let you know that there is ways to challenge these. And it's the same gosh darn things I tell you guys all the time. But I really wanted to talk about some specific examples of how it changes our thoughts, because I think that that's really empowering to know that you're not alone and how your body is choosing to respond. It's choosing to do so because it thinks that that is what's best for you. And when we can just hold that in our heart, which again is hard when we don't think we're worthy of that, but your body is doing what it thinks is best for you. And that's a beautiful thing. But some things that you can do to kind of help yourself. The first one is obviously to get support, to get help, to work with a professional. That is obviously the number one thing that I'm going to recommend. And I know that that's probably one of the hardest ones, but working it out with somebody who's trained in the field and is able to help you process through is going to just exponentially increase how fast you see results. When we try to do it on our own, it can just be really overwhelming without realizing it. And the thing about trauma is, depending how much trauma you have, how long it's been sitting in your body, what your experiences are, what your environment still currently is like, when you start to bring some of that stuff up, if there's no safe place for it to go, that can be very, very detrimental and scary and overwhelming. And so I want to make sure that when you bring these things up, you're doing it in a way that's safe and with somebody that can hold that space for you. Because when we bring stuff up too quickly and when we're not prepared, it can be really, really scary. And actually, I'll go as far as to say dangerous sometimes, because it can, when shame increases so much, it can make us have suicidal thoughts. It can make us just want the pain to stop. And so I say all these things because I've seen these things and I've experienced them, and I've witnessed clients experience them. And again, it's just a normal part of healing. And obviously, no, this stuff isn't fun. This stuff isn't fun to deal with, to talk about. But I can promise you that it does get better with time. And so that is the first thing. The second one is to try to challenge your thoughts. We have these negative thoughts, like I gave that example with jumping to conclusions and me like taking a second to process through. Try to challenge the thoughts that you're having. Because I guarantee you, if your thought is negative and self-harming, it's probably not true. I would bet 99.9% of the time it's not true. But the more that you allow yourself to believe it and you believe that it's true, it builds the belief and it starts to amplify that belief for yourself. And so challenging your thoughts. And I know, again, sometimes just going from saying, I'm not worthy to I'm worthy feels honestly disgusting. It's like, it's so hard to just tell yourself kind things. And so I've shared this before, but do something called a bridge statement. It's possible that I'm more worthy than I think. It's possible I'm worthy of being in a healthy relationship. It's possible that I'm capable of more. The word "it's possible" just gives yourself permission to maybe it's possible, maybe it's not, but it just allows you a little crutch and something to help you get to rewiring that thought. The next one I wrote down is grounding yourself. And I realized that I haven't done an episode on grounding in a really long time. And I do truly recognize that these things are very second nature to me because I know them and I've studied them. But I'm beginning to realize that this isn't common knowledge for everybody. And I need to remember for myself of why I started this whole thing is that it's not common knowledge. And so I'm thinking probably Thursday or sometime next week, I'm going to do an episode about ways to ground yourself, because I forget sometimes that this isn't just common practice, and it's unfortunate, but I think that we can get there. But grounding yourself is so important. And by ground yourself, really what I mean is coming back to your body. And this is again why I say to work with a mental health professional, because if coming back to your body is not a safe place to be, then that's not something that I would encourage you to try by yourself. But that is definitely one that is going to help you with challenging your negative thinking, is by grounding yourself and being present in the moment in whatever room or space you are in. I can't stress this one enough. Be gentle with yourself. Be kind to yourself as you navigate. If you've gone through something traumatic, you've already gone through enough. You don't need to put yourself through the pain and the shame and the fear and the guilt over and over and over again. You're worthy of letting that go and of finding hope and love and being kind on yourself as you navigate through that. So again, I know that one can be hard to believe, especially in the beginning or when we're starting to do the work, but just try to be gentle with yourself as you navigate through, because you're trying your best and you're doing your best and you're doing a really, really good job. Okay, the last couple ones I wrote are a strong support system, healthy coping, and patience. Healing takes time. Healing is an infinite journey. Healing never just goes away. There's never a day where you graduate from healing. It is a constant, continuous journey, and that goes for everybody on the face of this earth. It doesn't matter if you have 10 big T traumas or one small T trauma. Healing and evolving and working with yourself is a never-ending journey. That's why I say to be gentle with yourself, because once we give up and we tell ourselves like, I should be there by now, I should have it figured out by now, these thoughts should be gone by now, there we are restarting the cycle. This is going to take time. I'm a work in progress. I am progressing. I am getting better. I am showing up, telling yourself some of those affirmations that it's going to be okay and it takes time. And I want to normalize that it takes time, because I know it can be frustrating and overwhelming, right? I had clients that I worked with for 2+ years and they'd be like, am I there yet? And it's like, you've come so far. Look at how far you've come in the last 2 years, but there is still so much more work to do. And I know that that can feel defeating, because you're just like, well, holy crap, like, when does it end? But when you start to recognize your progress along the way, that's when it's like, oh, like, I remember one client specifically, the same person that I'm talking about that I worked with for years. I remember one day he's like, when is it time to work with the next phase of healing? So there's 3 phases of healing. And I worked in the safety and stabilization phase. So that's really like feeling safe in your body and grounding yourself. It's called phase 1 trauma healing. And I remember we had a conversation one day where he's like, I've been doing this for 2 years. Like, when is it time? And then we just did a reflection. And at the beginning of working together, this person couldn't even walk into a grocery store by themselves, because they had experienced some stuff in a grocery store that, quite frankly, took a lot of work to help them feel safe to do so again. And then we celebrated in that moment to be like, you went in a grocery store last week. Like, even talking about the physical building of a grocery store at the beginning of our work together would shut this client down. And the fact that they worked up to being able to go into the grocery store, even though it was only for like a couple minutes, that's a huge win. Focusing on your wins as you heal, because holy crap, like, that's a big deal. I know that hearing those things from an outside perspective, you're like, are you serious? Like, why would you be scared of a grocery store? Never shaming somebody for their experiences. I also just want to throw in here, if somebody has a fear of something, a phobia of something, doesn't want to talk about something, doesn't want to do something, please don't push them. Yes, it's healthy in a way to have exposure therapy, but that is something that needs to be done very slowly and with the proper care, because that can really, really, really overwhelm someone's nervous system to the point that it's very detrimental and actually re-traumatizing. And so I just want to throw in to never shame somebody. If something is overwhelming, don't peer pressure people. Like, I see this all the time, even just with drinking. If someone's like, I don't want to drink or go out because that just makes me feel weary. First of all, that's huge for someone to even state what they need and what they don't want. But I just want to normalize that it's also nobody's business to know why you don't want to do something or do something, and to never shame somebody for not wanting to do something, because there's likely a reason and something that maybe they're not talking about. So I just wanted to throw that out there, because I know even in sharing that story, it can be so easy to just judge and be like, we'll just go in the grocery store, like, what's the big deal? It's like, well, When that grocery store equates in their brain the same as a war veteran going to war, we need to realize that that is the truth. And that's what it feels like in their body because they've experienced something horrendous and their association is with that building. And so I get really fired up about these things because I'm just so protective of everybody's trauma and experiences because it's just so valid and you are just deserving that if you've gone through something, no experience is silly. If it affected you and it hurt you and it caused pain, first of all, I'm so sorry. I'm sorry that you went through that. I'm sorry that you're now living with that, but I hope you know that it can get better and that that does not define you. Your trauma does not define you, who you are, your potential, and your footprint on this earth. It is now a part of your story, and you get to dictate and decide what you want to do with that. If you want to share that, if you don't want to share that, but know that you have full control of your life, and you are so deserving of taking that and turning it into something incredible, because you are incredible, and I'm so proud of you. And I'm gonna stop blabbing now because we're over 30 minutes and I try to keep these episodes between 20 and 25 minutes, but this is a subject that I can genuinely talk about all day long. So I hope you all take a deep breath, take a second to just come back to your body, allow this to sit with you and just see how it feels and know that you're so worthy of getting help, and just be gentle with yourself as you navigate through. And I'm so proud of you and I cannot wait to chat with you all on Thursday. Bye, you guys.